Just recently, I was introduced to this idea that I've been working through in my head that our lives are made up or guided by the stories we believe to be true. And that connects to this book that I'm going to be reviewing today called Real Artists. I don't know if we can read that. There we go. Real Artists Don't Starve, which is kind of a provocative title. And he starts the book by telling the story of Michelangelo, who historically has been depicted as an artist who did amazing work but was always scraping by. In fact, many of Michelangelo's anecdotes, letters that he's written, he's often complaining about money and how he's sacrificed himself for his art, and now he's essentially a starving artist. But just recently, at least when the book was written, there had been a discovery of Michelangelo's bank statements. And what was discovered was that Michelangelo was actually potentially the richest artist in history, or at least before our modern era. And from the records we have, he actually probably had a fortune of about $47 million. One of the stories that, as artists, we often believe to be true is that of the starving artist. And the premise of this book is that many artists, especially those who are starving, are held back by a limiting belief based on a story about being an artist that we believe to be true, and that then shapes our lives and the way that we live them. So this book I got a number of years ago, and I really believe it's got some really important ideas that as artists we need to be thinking about and considering. And in this book, Jeff Goins talks about how to set yourself up as an artist to thrive. The book is divided into 3 sections. The first section is called Mindset, and it's really about changing the way we think about being and improving as an artist. And the second section is called Market, which is about changing the way our creativity interacts with the real world and we interact as artists with the real world. And the final section, which is called Money, is practical solutions and strategies to take what Jeff has talked about in the previous 2 sections to change our relationship or change our art's relationship with money. So jumping right into the first section, 2 ideas that have really stuck with me from this book are really about how art is made. And these 2 ideas, I think, are actually pretty controversial within the artistic community because we like to think of ourselves as creating original things. And that's actually the first thing he tackles. He says, stop trying to be original. That's the first step of being creative. And the idea is that we can't really create anything from scratch. Instead, we take what we've been given and we present it and we look at it in new ways. And that one of the best ways to learn how to be good at art, to begin to master something, is just to mimic the masters. We need to intentionally fill our minds with inspiration and the kinds of art that we want to emulate, people that we respect, things that we appreciate, to kind of give our minds the resources to actually be creative. And while he says creativity starts with stealing, it doesn't end there. And so next he talks about this idea of apprenticeship and how our current form of education is really kind of foreign to the way the world has historically worked. In the past, if you wanted to get good at something, you would go and apprentice under a master. Skill is not enough. You must be teachable, and we must be continually growing. And for me, this is that realization that creativity doesn't thrive in a box. We need other people. And this is something that I've struggled with, having the humility to find people who are better at the craft that I want to do than I am so that I can learn from them. And then after you've done those things, you are now set up to cross the threshold from being creative to doing creative work, which is what section 2 is about. Market. And in this section, Goins is really making the argument that we as artists need to change the way that we interact with the world, or at least our art interacts with the world. That as artists, we can be insecure and want to just practice our art in secret and not let anybody see it because we're afraid of rejection. And the first way that he talks about doing that is what he calls cultivating patrons. That being discovered isn't just a chance coincidence, it's actually something that's prepared for and planned for. And so we need to learn to put ourselves in places where opportunity is likely to happen. He argues that artists don't just need patrons, patrons actually need artists. And so one of the steps to doing that is what he calls going and joining a scene. And this is also something that I've just really been thinking about lately, because I haven't been good at developing my community, finding like-minded people who can encourage me in my art or in the things I'm working through. In the book, he shares all kinds of stories of different artists, famous artists. The reason they succeeded was not just because they were brilliant, but because they had intentionally placed themselves in communities of artists who supported them and encouraged them, helped mature them, helped grow them. And one of his quotes from the book is, "Great work does not come about through a single stroke of genius, but by the continual effort of a community." So as artists, we need to spend time intentionally developing and looking for a network to surround ourselves with and put ourselves in. As a teenager, me and my friends noticed this with music. Which artists knew each other? There was a band in Toronto called Thousand Foot Crutch, not a particularly big band outside of its little niche, but the lead singer, Trevor McNevin, is the first thank you on all kinds of albums, huge bands. He's in the credits on their CDs because they all knew each other. There was a community there that when one person began to float, they began to pull everybody with them. And it wasn't that they just said, "Hey, come with me." It was that they were all developing and pushing each other to become better artists so that they all became better artists together. There's this real power in being networked that a solo artist just doesn't have. And you see it on YouTube as well. How many of these little cloisters of YouTubers in Toronto or somewhere else that they all know each other, they all live, a couple blocks from each other, they all live close to each other, and they all kind of get popular all at the same time. That's not just because they shouted each other out. It's because there's something about growing as an artist that happens when you do it in community. And his encouragement is that, well, some people, they'll move to Austin or they'll move to Paris or they'll move to Toronto to get close to a community. That's not always necessary. Sometimes the community that you need is actually right in front of you, and you just need to step back in order to recognize it. And that oftentimes the people we need have been placed right around us, and they're already there. We just need to actually start engaging with them as our community. And another point he makes piggybacking on this is just how important it is then to collaborate with others. And he argues that we don't do our best work alone. We actually do it when we're working with others. Genius happens in groups. And I can see that in my own life to be true, that I really am more creative when I'm collaborating and I'm working with others. Once again, you see that in filmmakers, you see that in YouTubers, you see that in musicians. It's not just about the people you know, but it's the people that you're willing to work with and allowing those experiences to make you a better artist. And thirdly, he argues for practicing in public, which I've talked about a little bit on this channel before. And he says that we want to believe that if we do our art, our jobs well enough, that the audience will find us. But that's not really how it works. In order to be found, you have to be findable. Sometimes we can feel like crazy things are virtuous. There's no virtue in hiding the buy button or making it difficult for people to pay you or difficult for people to see your work. There's no better way to get discovered than to put your work out there, to risk rejection. And that can be hard to do, but we need to do it. And that's what I'm doing with these videos right now. This is not a perfect video. I'm practicing. I'm putting it out there and letting feedback come at me, even if the feedback isn't always pleasant. Maybe this video gets 20 views. That's not that fun, but I'm getting feedback. I'm learning, I'm growing. So Goins says that thriving artists do more than just bloom where they're planted. They put their work where it has the greatest potential to succeed. And that leads him into part 3 about money, which is, like I said, basic practical strategies for actually employing the things that he's talked about in their first 2 sections. 2 things that really struck out to me in these sections were the idea that charging what you're worth starts with believing you're worth what you're charging. Because it's really easy as artists to think that it comes easy to me, therefore it's not worth much. But we need to recognize that what we're doing is very difficult for some people. And when we understand the value of what we're doing, then charging that suddenly becomes much less difficult, because as artists and creatives, It is so easy to undercharge. We do it all the time because maybe it feels like it won't hurt as much when people say no. And Goins argues that your work matters, but the world won't recognize it until you do. We can't just be sitting around waiting for somebody to tell us how valuable what we're doing is. We have to recognize it and then be able to explain that to others. I hope that gives you something to think about. If you want to dig in deeper, I would recommend this book. It's just got a lot of really great insights. Really easy read. I'll put a link in the description below if you want to check that out. Paperback, ebook, audiobook, all available. Thanks for hanging out today. I appreciate you guys helping me practice in public. If you want to keep helping me practice in public, this video right here, I would love to see you in that one. Bye.